On this episode of AV Week, Extron's NAV series gets government certified. Also, Crestron and Microsoft team up for a Teams scheduling panel. All that and more next on AV Week.
The network for the AV industry.
What are you listening to?
This
is AV.
This
is AVNation.
This is AVNation.
This is AV Week, episode 486, recorded Friday, December 11th, 2020. Silver Linings.
Support for AVNation is brought to you by
Sure, sound extraordinary.
And by Crestron.
This is AV Week, your weekly wrap-up of audio-visual news and information. My name is Tim Albright. I am your host. With us to discuss the news and information this week, first and foremost, a young lady that got to hang out with Megan Dutta, not with me, but with Megan Dutta during the AV Network Nation event. Charmaine Torella from Barracks. Welcome, ma'am.
Thank you. Nice to be back. Hi, Tim. Hi, everybody.
And you can still see Charmaine and the incredible words of wisdom that she delivered during the AV Network Nation event. If you go to avnetworknation.com, you can watch all of that for the next 30 days. And if you watch all the stuff, you get 4.75 RU. So that's at least worth, what was it, 4 or 5 hours? So yeah, absolutely. Also with us, a industry veteran who has been around the block once or twice. His name is Brad Grimes. Welcome, sir.
Good to be back. Good to see you guys.
Absolutely. And last but not least, a young man I've been trying to get on for at least 3 or 4 years, Dana Corey from AVWeek. Welcome, sir.
Thanks, Tim. Thanks for the young man. That's nice to know there.
Here's the thing. When you get to a certain age, darn near everybody's a young man, because I may not look it because I've got the hair, but it's getting there. I'll have my AARP card in about 3 or 4 years. So let's just put it that way. All right, let's kick this off here. First story comes to us from our friends actually over at avnetwork.com. Extron NAV series has met the federal government cryptographic requirements, also known as NIST, the National Institute of Standards and Technology Guidelines for FIPS. Unfortunately, the article does not define what FIPS is, and I can't remember off the top of my head, so Bradford will have to beat me up for that one. So from Casey Hall, Extron, quote unquote, we are excited to announce that our NAV Pro AV over IP series meets the FIPS 140-2 standard, ensuring that sensitive data is protected. Dana, I want to start with you on this because you are our manufacturer on this call. Walk me through, and I'm not going to ask for all the steps and stuff like that, but how important is it from a manufacturer standpoint that you get government certified? We're talking about the U.S. government here, but obviously different governments have different regulations and different standards. But to sell to the government and to be able to sell into that channel, how important is it to get things like this certification?
Yeah, and this is obviously really impressive, another notch in Extron's belt for sure. I have to speak from our perspective in the display side. We look at two things, especially the government. One is country of origin as a more compliant or friendly nation to that, and we pride ourselves in that part of it as well. So one part of it is just where you manufactured for reasons related to political and security, of course, security being the highest part. Second part would be the compliance around the operating system which you use. In this case, we use primarily the Windows-based program because of the security it offers, right? And of course, within Windows or Microsoft, they have certain GCC and also DoD parameters of security that they deploy, and of course, that's a big part of the government. So I spent my time yesterday with one agency in particular, and that development and that security is the utmost concern, right? Because sharing and data and where it's saved and not saved and what they can have is vital. And the problem that I faced yesterday was that, of course, in these situations, the government can be behind the times a little bit on the technology, especially on the software side, because it hasn't been approved yet. So there are things commercially we see available that are like, we want that, and then we get there and find out, well, you don't have that yet because it's not been approved. So always that fine battle there. But
really quickly on that, is that more along the lines of getting, let's say, firmware, right, approved through the process channel, where you have to explain to your users, the folks that are contacting you, that, hey, your folks have it, we're just waiting for them to approve it? Is that the process there?
Yeah, not so much firmware. This would be more in the, let's just take an example, Office 365 or Microsoft, for example. there is a commercially readily available that is secure because it's Microsoft, right?
Yeah.
And then there's the government secured version, which takes a little more time to go through that process. So yes, many times, like yesterday, just a matter of fact, it was, we want that. And it's like, yeah, not yet. Maybe soon, but it's for the right reasons, right? It's about that security. And that's the only way to do that is to administer that kind of program that can lag sometimes, and sometimes it doesn't, right? I'll give you an example. We talk about Zoom and Zoom's some of the security stuff this year. Now look at Zoom being used on different government calls. Clearly, they've addressed it. So there are ways when they need it that they can move fast. So
yeah. All right, Charmaine. So I've got a question. When you're talking with your clients, and I'm not going to ask you which government agencies you work with because one of us will get in trouble, and probably both. How important is this as you're going into a system and you and your team are helping to design it to make sure that some of these boxes are checked for a government certification?
Oh, it's absolutely important. I mean, depending on the agency itself, right? Certain agencies can communicate outside, origin United States, outside into another place, or the origin of that office is outside of the US. So this is depending on the agency, this is, very critical, especially if they're dealing with international, communications and data going across borders. So for them, this is very important. Not a lot of products for like the Extron, this certification, this compliance, I should say, can do that. And they look for that and they vet their products out as best as they can to ensure there's compliance to security, especially considering what's been happening in the last 4 years with collaboration in the government sector across the board, right? Since the issue in 2015 with a candidate, said former candidate, where now they are tasked with really making sure this is, something they have to constantly address and roll it out throughout, as many agencies as possible. So that's been a focus since then for the last 4 or 5 years. And so for them, it's probably going to ramp up now in the next couple of years. And they have a lot of capital invested in making sure this happens. So that's another thing to note. A lot of federal agencies have capital that's from here to 2026 that they're going to utilize to ensure that their systems have certain compliances and securities there. So there is a revenue pool that integrators need to think about going forward as to, everyone's thinking about how to pivot after COVID. Government is that way, and products like this can help you do that and do that pivot if you start getting into it right now.
Really quickly, Charmaine, I want to hit on something you said. You said through 2026, these government agencies have this budget. If you know, and if you can say, and if you can't, that's fine. What is it that they hope to accomplish? Is it through the 2026? And the reason I'm asking is you're talking about a 5-6 year time, depending on we're at the end of 2020 here. Is it simply getting folks remote? Is it securing? Is it shoring up security? What is it that they're hoping to accomplish with this budget and with that timeline?
Hoping to shore up security, which is the main thing. It appears sometimes, and we'll just go to the federal agencies within this country. It sometimes would appear in the past that these federal agencies had secure ways of securing their collaboration technology. And that's not always the case depending on the agency. That's pretty as much as far as I can go with that.
That works. That absolutely works. No,
and with the 2016 campaign with the email situation, there's a lot more of those types of situations that do happen that the public is not always privy to in other agencies.
Right.
As a result, funding was in a lot of areas set aside to shore that up. And also a lot of it is outdated. A lot of people don't realize that, a lot of it is outdated because federal agencies have a problem shifting systems to something new unless it has a certain level of compliance and security. So thus they stick with what they know has already been approved and certified that yes. And for a while, they're going to keep running with it until they find that, unicorn, that magical unicorn of a product that's going to have everything that old product had. So you have a lot of agencies right now that are sitting on, older product, and they're becoming obsolete. Once they break down, it becomes harder to fix, to replace. So they really have to move forward now, and they have to move forward to something that will have that security and compliance, because the old stuff, they're hanging on to it, right? They're stitching it by a thread and taping it up and keeping it going because it has that compliance. But it's becoming obsolete. So that's the main reason, because, that's what federal agencies for the most part will do. As long as it works, as long as we can get it fixed, until there's something that gives me all these things, we're not going to upgrade anything. And that's very different than enterprise. Enterprise, is very different in that aspect. They will upgrade more often than a federal agency will.
Yeah, absolutely. That's why the IRS is still running on punch cards. So
yeah,
that was a joke, kids. I hope it got not. All right, Mr. Grimes, you've been covering this industry for a minute here. Walk me through the last 20 years of, 20 years ago-ish is when a lot of folks will say the first RJ45 connector was put on the back of an piece of AV gear. And we've had our share of ups and downs and hits and misses and, pieces of code being dropped into touch panels in the war room of the White House. I don't know who did that, but, somebody did. It was AMX, Brad, before you think too hard. So, walk me through this process and how this has evolved over the last 20 years from nothing ever being on the network. So we really weren't concerned ourselves with security to suddenly, if it's a piece of AV gear going into a system, it inherently is going on the network. And so suddenly products like this, like the Extron piece, does need to have, certain levels of certification to even be considered for certain jobs.
Is this still the FIPS question? Because I was going to stand in for Bradford and tell you what FIPS was.
Go ahead. Yes.
No.
This is the FIPS question.
And you mentioned 20 years. That's about as old as FIPS is. I mean, FIPS is one of the pillars of information security and on government networked equipment. And pretty much it's for the cryptographic modules in the equipment. You pretty much need to do it. You need to have it to sell into the government. But as more AV equipment sits on a network, on a government network, and has security implications, it needs to meet these certifications, because a lot of times when you're a procurement officer for a federal agency, compliance is key, and it's easy to tick off. It's easy for me to turn around and say, is it FIPS compliant? And if it's not, then I can close the door right there. And fortunately, companies like Extron, Crestron, others have been, taking the initiative to get their equipment FIPS certified, so that they can say yes in those situations. But yes, in the government, being compliant, meeting the NIST standards, the information processing standards of NIST is critical to selling into the government. And so if you're on that list, then you can sell your products into a lot of these agencies. FIPS 142, which Extron got, we were saying before we went on the air, is about to become FIPS 143. I don't know what that means, if everybody has to recertify all their equipment in the coming years, but yeah, it's an important step for anybody who wants to sell in the government, and I applaud Extron for doing it.
Yeah, absolutely. And that actually will be something to watch as FIPS kind of flips to the next generation. Thanks so much for watching this first segment of AVWeek. To check out the rest of the episode for free, click on the link below or go by the website, avnation.tv. That's avnation.tv.